Thank you for joining me today. Delight to be with you from this side of the pond in the UK. And I've got a dear friend of mine who is about to join me, and we are going to discuss the state of the church in the US and some of the cultural challenges that we are both dealing with on both sides of the pond. Don, welcome, my friend. How are you?
It's good to be with you. I am fat and good looking, like always, and
I got
excited to do what I do.
well, but brilliant. It's lovely to see you. And the last time we saw each other was in August in Chicago at this event. Is that right, sir?
It is the Parliament of the World's Religions, and I thought if you would like to take a moment, I could show a couple of photos of some of the goings on at things like the Parliament. It's one of the things
Yeah.
that we go to.
No, that'd be
Uh,
great. That'd be great.
well, let's see if I can do this. Yep, it looks like I can do this just fine. There we go. There we go. And you have to bring it in, I think. And there it is. This one is actually in Salt Lake City, if I recall. And those are angels. They are peace angels. And
Right.
they attend some of these parliaments to bring peace to the earth. So that's some of the sights and sounds that you might see at the Parliament of the World's Religions.
Mm.
This one is Buddhist, and they are doing, I forget the exact name of it, but I call it the frog song because they sound like bullfrogs chanting. It's pretty interesting stuff that goes on there. Um, so we have quite a variety of things. These are the outfits, by the way, that they are trying to become chaplains, Parliament of the World Religions chaplains for the UN. To represent religions all around the world. And so these are their chaplain outfits that they have come up with. So these are things that you didn't see because they were not at the one in Chicago.
No.
Um, these are two young ladies from a group out of France, small cult of about 400 in
Mm.
France. And this is where they meet in France. So you'll see they have a Buddha over here and they have Jesus over here on this side. So it's interesting stuff.
But it's brilliant. I know it's a bit sort of round the wrong way in a way because it's great that you've shown these pictures of what you do. Could you describe, explain to me what you do, what your ministry? I'm just going to pull out of that. Thank you. What your ministry is about.
Well, Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. is a mission to cults and non-Christian religions. My wife and I grew up as an atheist, and so I became a Christian about 3 years after we married. Um, that's kind of its own story how all that happened. But uh, after that happened, my wife met some Jehovah's Witnesses on a bowling league that she really liked, and she wanted to reach them. And so she was trying to sort it out. We talked about it. How do we do this? Went to our pastor. He didn't really know much about Jehovah's Witnesses. He didn't know much about cults. Good man of God, solid Bible teacher, not familiar with cults or other religions. And so he gave us a little tract which had a bunch of Bible verses on it, but we didn't know why they were important. It didn't explain it really. So she became a woman on a mission at that point. After a while, we started just buying books to read what we could discover, and there weren't many, maybe 4 or 5 books out there. And so we sort of became self-taught. One thing led to another. Eventually, we opened a pre-recorded helpline for Jehovah's Witnesses.
Wow.
I was going to become a rich general contractor and support missionaries. I never intended on being one. But in 1995, because it had grown and we started dealing with other groups, we started Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. On April 1 of 1995. So April Fool's Day, figure that one out. So that's how we started. And we had already been to the first Parliament of World Religions in 1993. So that was our first taste of dealing with other religions. And over time, this is just grown. Now we kind of deal with Satanists and Wiccans and Hindus and Buddhists, and well, you've been to the Parliament and everything that goes on there. We are a small group. There's about 12 or 15 of us. Our friend Carl Tygrib, our mutual friend
Mm,
Carl Tygrib,
mm.
Bill Hunsberger from Haven Ministries, and a few of his folks. There's about a dozen to 15 of us maybe that try to go to these events regularly. Most Christians are not even aware that they are going on. We're at the Paganicon 2023 in Minnesota. There was 1,000, if you can imagine that, 1,000 Wiccans, pagans, Druids, and Satanists all in one location, and 4 Christians. It was an open
What was that event, Don, again?
Paganicon 2023. It's a gathering of pagans every year in Minnesota area, in the Minneapolis area, and it's growing. So this past year it was 1,000 paid who had attended, according to the those who put it on. And I took one of the young fellows that I'm discipling in this area with me, and he was just shocked at the kinds of things that are going on, and to be able to talk with Wiccans and pagans and Satanists and find out firsthand what they actually do believe and what they practice was kind of helpful to him as well. So
Why do you? I mean, you and I had to. I mean, bluntly, we had this conversation at the Parliament of World Religions, where my head's spinning, going, "Why aren't there more of us here? Why?" And with all your wealth of experience, Don, because that was going to be my next question to you. Why isn't the church attending? Why are people not aware of that? And also, then you could segue into, why do people criticize you, I, Carl, others for going to those events?
well, why do they criticize? That's a question of motive I can't completely answer. Most are afraid of doing it because they are ill-equipped. In fact, we have a publication we put out every Thursday called The Crux, and one of the things in The Crux this week was a short article on how evangelicals think they can defend the Bible to non-believers, and when they engage in doing that, discover they cannot. So the result is they end up not engaging in trying to reach out with the gospel to non-believers. I mean, what are you going to do if you're trying to talk with a Wiccan and you can't even defend your position on the Bible,
Hmm.
much less challenge their position on their faith? That's a problem. So we have biblical illiteracy. Let me give you some statistics. We did an article uh, earlier this year in February called "What's Happening in the Church," and we cited some statistics from something called the 2022 State of Theology Report. This is important. They do it every 2 years. And what they do is, after enough polling and research, they come out and they go, okay, here is the state of theology within evangelical churches uh, statistically. 43% of U.S. evangelicals agreed with statement number 4, quote, God learns and adapts to different circumstances, end quote. In other words, almost half of U.S. evangelicals believe that God is growing and learning and adapting with that as time goes on. He is not all knowing, he's ever learning. That's a very different God than the Bible teaches.
Hmm.
53%, over half of U.S. evangelicals agree that the Bible, like all sacred books, contains helpful accounts of ancient myths, but is not literally true.
Wow, 53% say that, which
53%
is
of
the
U.S.
book, which is the
Yeah,
book, which is the foundation of their faith. Hmm.
correct, correct. So when you ask why are Christians unaware or uninvolved in these things, this is why they are not well taught. 42% of evangelicals agree that gender identity is a matter of choice. Now, this is in 2022. This has grown since then.
Mm.
46% of U.S. evangelicals agree that, quote, the Bible's condemnation of homosexual behavior doesn't apply today. This is staggering. I mean, this is pretty straightforward stuff in Scripture, Old and New Testament. This is not new. 56% of evangelicals agree that, quote, God accepts the worship of all religions, including Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. This is a heretical view called perennialism. It's the
Yes.
idea that all religions have the truth about God
Mm.
in its core beliefs. Then it's just not true. 43% believe that Jesus was a great teacher, but he was not God. 43%.
Well, the percentages you're giving me are half of evangelicals don't believe
That is
this,
correct.
they don't believe that. That's the worrying statistic that you've seen. When was the last time that you saw maybe a survey like that? Was there one done 8 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years
I
ago?
Every 2 years I see them.
Right,
They come out every 2 years. Yeah.
Mm,
And so the numbers go up slightly each time. They
yeah,
don't go down.
yeah, yeah.
And it kind of comes from the same problem. We have a plague of celebrity preachers like Andy Stanley, for example, who they have a huge church and therefore a huge influence on the rest of the churches around the nation. Unfortunately, he also leans progressive.
Mm.
And so he's the one that came out 2 years ago and said we need to disconnect from the Old Testament. Why would you do that? I mean,
Wow, wow, wow. So he would he be on the streets of New York and other cities right now with a bunch of young liberal
no,
progressives?
no, no, he would not. Uh, well, you mean
The pro Hamas rallies.
the pro Hamas rallies? I
Mm.
don't know. I don't know the position he would take on that because the progressives within evangelicalism, some would lean towards saying yes, let's go join those protests. Others would not. So that one's a little iffy.
Sorry, Don. The reason why I say that, if someone's saying, "Well, let's just discard the Old Testament," then you know the direction that I'm going in. There was a covenant made. That's it. You can't discard it.
Right.
Well, you can't discard any of it, but that is the ramifications of discarding that, not understanding, and then that there is a pass to Romans 11 and all the importance of this. I'm not a theologian, but anyone who says, "Oh, we're dismissed that," no.
Well, you know what? We can kind of see, and we've written a lot on this in our
Mm.
journals. You haven't read many of them, but this is one of the things that really concerns me is the state of the church and how it got this way because it took time. And kind of my one of the things I say pretty often is the time we live in today is more like the first century than any time in between. Now, it took about 300 years for the church to transform the civilization it was born in the first century to Western culture, about 300 years. We have lived in the Judeo-Christian worldview. That doesn't mean they were Christians, but they fundamentally held to a Judeo-Christian view of ethics, morality, and so forth. They believed there was a God. They did believe there was one God in general. They weren't Christians per se, but it was a Christianized culture. It has taken roughly 200 years for pagans to return the favor and bring us back to paganism. And in some degree, the church is responsible for that. If you go back into the late 1700s, for example, the role of the pastor was simple. They were to train and equip what we would call layman scholars. And so the elders were actually trained in the same way they would be trained in Bible college or
mm,
seminary.
mm,
You had a congregation that was more biblically literate. In 1825, that changed under Charles Finney. And it changed in this way. He stumbled onto this idea uh, and then implemented it. The idea is that our task is to get unbelievers into the church so we can give them the gospel in the church. So you're no longer now training and equipping the laity to go out and share the gospel. You're having a professional gospel presenter in the church. And he did this with the altar call mentality. And so he would do his revival meetings. They would bring unbelievers in. They would get them saved. Maybe get them saved. Preach the gospel. But then there was no follow-up, no discipleship, no training. And so you had a largely biblically illiterate group in the church beginning in 1825. By the time you get to the 1900s, the lack of biblical knowledge was so great that they started, two wealthy brothers started funding the writing of some pamphlets, let's say, some treatises on the fundamentals of the faith. And that came out then in book form. Biola University, it was Biola Bible Institute at the time, published it as a volume, The Fundamentals. And they gave them to pastors and missionaries around the world to get people trained in the and that's where the term fundamentalist came from, was that time. They also started leaving the colleges and universities, which were largely going Marxist. Now, Carl Tyker could speak to this as well because he's written extensively on this also. And so they left the universities largely and started Bible colleges. Over a 20-year period, they founded about 300 Bible colleges. Why? Because they wanted little Johnny and little Jane to be biblically trained. That only worked to a degree, because culture still is always enticing and calling, and we tend to follow that siren's call, let's say.
What year was that? What year were they beginning to build the Bible colleges?
Probably the around in the 1920s to 40s.
Right.
Right. So you see a lot of them started at around that time, and for that purpose. Then in 1947, we had sort of a split in the movement between fundamentalists and what's now called evangelicals. And when that happened, there was kind of this deal made on the part of evangelicals where they would say to liberals, we will call you Christian if you will call us smart. I mean, they didn't say that, but that's kind of how it worked out. And so you started giving away elements of the faith in order to be considered well educated and embraced and accepted by liberals. It never works out well that way.
No.
Because you just become more like liberals.
Yeah, every time you concede, well, here's an analogy. Every time you concede land when you shouldn't, you're absolutely right. That is what then happens. The land is taken,
Right.
as in this case. Yeah, the
Right.
values then go down.
Right.
Don, that is absolutely fascinating to me, because in 1825, then we're saying that in many ways the church then started not to train people to go out, but to then train people to stay inside their church and just to hire some professional hireling to do the work that they should be doing 5 to 6 days a week, as in just their normal life, jobs, whatever they get up to. So we seem to have moved a heck of a long way in that regard.
Well, we have. I mean, if you know much about multi-level marketing, I sometimes equate it to being a multi-level marketing plan for Jesus, where the individuals don't really grasp what it is that they're doing in their multi-level marketing, and they are not taught to make the presentation, but rather they are encouraged to invite your potential downline person to the presentation where the professional presenter will give them the plan. if you think about it, that's kind of what has happened with the church to a large degree. That doesn't mean all of them. Certainly, there are some churches that are really doing a good job and trying hard to train their people. But this trend continued until the mid 1970s when Bill Hybels and Rick Warren both came on the scene. Now, Bill Hybels basically took the same ideas that Charles Finney had taken because he grew up thinking, okay, the task is to get unbelievers into the church so we can give them the gospel from the front. We're not getting many unbelievers in church, so we need to do it in a way that'll be more um, accessible to them. We'll play music that they'll be familiar with, at least the sound of it. We will eliminate all religious symbology. We'll look more like a corporate structure. We'll only do 2 songs so that they don't have to feel like they have to sing and participate. And we'll do a series 4 to 6 weeks and then bring the gospel in at that point. Now, here's what happens as a result of that is you have moved the educating and discipling of the saints out of the church. You've moved the mission of the church, which is evangelism, into the church, and neither one are being done well. So the ministry of the church is equipping, training, caring for the flock. The mission of the church is sharing the gospel outside the church. You don't have anyone really trained for either one, and so it's just not being done.
Didn't Hybels a few years ago apologize to his congregation saying, we've spent all this money on these training courses where actually what we should have done was just encourage people to read the Bible for themselves?
He didn't do that, though.
No, but did he say? Did he say that? I think
here's what he said. No, that isn't what he said. He said it was a huge thing internationally. I was getting phone calls from around the planet going,
right?
Is he going to say that? It was a we were wrong, mea culpa moment. And we waited to see what it was that he was going to replace it with. What he replaced it with wasn't Bible reading or teaching, it was contemplative prayer. Richard Rohr played a role in that. Brian McLaren and others.
Right. Yeah. Let's touch on Richard Rohr. You and I had a very, very interesting experience with you and everyone else at the Parliament of World Religions because we attended a seminar where Richard Rohr was on the panel along with another lady. I think there was attached to Southern Baptist Association. Then there was another guy there who had previously. We are now talking about psychedelic drugs and mushrooms and all the rest. And this guy had been part of an experiment in the past. And then there'd been a recent experiment. And this particular lady who says she's from the Southern Baptist Association had taken this. And of course, Richard Rohr, you can now tell everyone about who Richard Rohr is, because the reason why it's such a privilege for me to talk to you, Don, is that the Bill Hybels, the Rick Warren, the Richard Rohr, and all those influences have come over into the UK.
Right. Well, and Richard Rohr influenced largely the theology of the emergent to progressive movement.
Right.
He and Brian McLaren, Rob Bell, and others became very good friends.
Yeah.
Richard Rohr is a monk, Franciscan monk. By the way, we did an article after the Parliament on Richard Rohr because he was introducing the psychedelic drugs as a sacrament of the church, if you recall, which we thought, okay, that's going to be an interesting place. So you got baptism, you have communion, and you have let's get high Sunday or something like that. I don't know exactly how that works. But Richard Rohr is Franciscan. He is what's called a panentheist, which means that God is bigger than the universe, but the universe is his body. He is in and through everything. And so when you touch the table, you're touching God. When you touch the microphone, you're touching God. When you touch yourself, you're touching God, because God is in and through everything. He also teaches that all religions have have God. They is central in their thinking that they do have the same view of God that we do, which is not true. That's called perennialism. We mentioned that before.
Hmm.
He also teaches that we have never been separated from God, even though the Bible says we are separated from God by sin. And so the cure to that, he teaches, is the Enneagram, which he has trained many to use that. The Enneagram is a symbol. It has 9 points within the symbol,
Hmm.
and each of those points are paths that you might take to get you back to the realization that you're not separated from God, that you created a false self that thinks you're a sinner. And really the way to cure this is to take the path the Enneagram directs you to back to your true self, which is already with God. So we wrote a book.
That sounds like doing a Ouija board of some kind,
It
Don.
kind of does, yeah, it kind of does. Very popular, very popular on both sides of the pond. Actually, it's
Yeah.
here and there. Uh,
So
and
these nine. So this. Sorry, we're slightly going a different direction. Slightly segue a bit here because this is really important because of your knowledge and all the rest. Yes, I know Christians have done the Enneagram. You said the 9 points. Go on, if you can explain that.
well, okay, you take a test. That's the
Mm,
first thing you do. And the test was developed by New Agers.
right.
Uh, so that should tell you you're in trouble right away.
Yeah.
And as you do the test, it tells you uh, what characteristics each of the numbers would have, and then kind of explains, okay, you are someone who likes to get things done, and so this is your personality, and you would be a
Mm,
3, let's say.
mm,
Uh, so you are one of those 9, and since it doesn't really work well, they added something called wings, and so you are maybe a 9 with a wing on each side of that that supplements who you are. And once you then sort that out, once you figure that test out, then you have quote tools that you were given in order to figure out how to treat one another better in a marriage situation or understand each other better or those kinds of things. It has not done well because it's actually brought about divorces and church splits and things like that, which I would expect. Uh, the basic ideas came from occultism,
yeah.
not from the
Yeah.
Bible.
Yeah.
They were channeled through Claudio Naranjo, through automatic writing.
Mm,
That should cause you some concern. I mean, there's literally nothing Christian about it, but it's being sold. The first book, pro Enneagram book in the church, was done by University Press in 2016. It was written by Suzanne Stabile and Ian Cron, both of which were trained by Richard Rohr.
oh, yeah.
That book has sold over 1 million copies at this point. When we first did our book, there were about 8 titles, I think, or 12 titles out there
Mm,
promoting the Enneagram by InterVarsity Press, Zondervan, Thomas Nelson Publishers. We did our book in 2020. Since then, we now have well over 60 pro Enneagram books by Christian publishers. This is huge. This is huge. It has nothing to do with the Bible.
no, it's huge. It's also deeply worrying because people, to me, this is my opinion, people are ignorant of these things. It's because I have access to you, I have access to Carl, others, a few others, but I can benefit from your research and all the rest. Um, why don't, I suppose the stupid question is, why don't people get it? I suppose maybe they just want a simple answer. What are your thoughts, Don?
Well, okay, my thoughts are this. Let's start with the Old Testament and work forward to today.
Mm,
Because I think we see a theme running through scriptures from Genesis 1 through maps, let's say, all of the Bible, and it is this: people are gullible
mm,
and they are easily deceived as a result of that. often because they are unfamiliar with what Scripture teaches. So, nearly all of in the Old Testament, we have this repeated issue of the leaders God raised up communicating to the people how they should behave and what they should believe, and they in turn just abandoned that and started worshiping idols
Right.
repeatedly, right? So
Right.
that's not new. In the New Testament, nearly every book in the Bible, with the exception of Philemon, was written for specific reasons to refute heresy, to expose false prophets,
Hmm.
and to deal with bad behavior. Those three things. Every single book. Even the Gospels. Gospel of John. Why? Gospel of John, he's refuting Docetism. That was a false teaching coming into the church. The first 18 verses are just refuting that heresy. And then everything that follows is a result of that heresy. So when we say, why is the church in a state of sin today? This is not new. This has gone on all down through the centuries. The cure will be limited. It will be those who have pastors who are capable and willing to teach on a regular basis, not only what the Bible says, but how to think about and live a Christian life. Things like logic. Why are we not teaching logic in church? That's a simple question. Uh, we discover as we read Jesus' teachings, this is intrigues me, is not only did he fully understand the Word of God, of course he authored it, so that would make sense, but he almost always used questions when confronted with issues. He almost never just came out and directly answered a question.
Okay.
Why is that? It draws someone out. It makes them define what it is that they're actually claiming or stating to define it. And then he asks them the next question, which usually ends up in them hanging themselves with it. That's a much easier way, but that takes logic and reasoning to do that. That's not being taught in churches largely. I'm blessed that my home church, my pastor agrees with every single thing I've said here. So we have an adult ed class every Sunday morning just dealing with this aspect of the faith. What is the faith? How do we understand the faith? How do we ask reasonable questions? How do we talk with various people in various situations? How do we explain Christian doctrine in as simple a way as possible? So they have that in addition to his teaching through the Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, verse by verse, in context. Context. I have to tell you, Mark, this is amazing to me. Nearly everyone I bring out of a cult or false religion, or nearly every Christian who contacts me with a question, I have to start with the same thing, and that is this: the context. A text without a context is a pretext. And then I usually have to work with them for a few months, helping them understand how this works, because then when they call me with a question about a passage, I have to say, what is the context? And I just had one 2 weeks ago, someone I've been working with for a few years, great guy. He was in a cult called the Urantia book. And he really has grasped this well, but he called me up one day and he said, I'm confused. I'm reading Matthew 7 something, and I'm not quite making the connection. I said, well, you don't have the whole context. He goes, well, I read the verses before and after. I said, okay, the context for this starts in chapter 5. You're confused because the chapter breaks were added in. They weren't in the original. The verse were added in. They weren't in the original. And so this conclusion that you're reading here started in Matthew chapter 5, and you follow Matthew chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 7 to the conclusion. And you went, oh, that makes perfect sense. But you had to have the whole context of 3 chapters to get to that point.
I'm encouraged that there is this kind of depth on your side of the pond, because I know it's there because I've seen it also with my own eyes. I personally don't my own experience, without sounding negative, I'm concerned about the huge lack of depth over here, and that what's happened is that we've taken, various movements that have come out of America and brought them over here. So you mentioned the name Rick Warren earlier, and of course Rick Warren has now become honorary chancellor of Spurgeon's College in South London. I'm sure you are aware of that.
I am.
Yeah. Now, that has, for me, huge ramifications because it is it's like the emerging church movement capturing the citadel. I don't think that's a bad analogy.
I don't think it's a bad analogy, and unfortunately, we're seeing that happen in Bible colleges and universities around the world, literally, because it's happening here as well. It's also splitting the fellowship of churches as well as denominations. For example, Southern Baptist Convention is not a denomination; it's a fellowship of churches that have band together. But they're going through a split right now and have been since 2019.
Yes.
Really regarding critical race theory. This is pretty big for them because they have the progressives that are pushing critical race theory and progressive views versus conservatives are going, no, the Bible is our final rule for faith and practice. So that's a battle that I'm interested in watching. I don't know how it's going to shake out. My suspicion is they're going to end up splitting.
When you say end up splitting, so what is that going to look like? How is it? Are there a group of churches that put into a central fund to run a sort of
all of them put into
fund?
Yes, all of them put into a central fund to support missionaries, to support their universities and publishing houses and things like that. If there's a split, they're going to have to divide up the assets. That's what's going to happen.
A friend of mine who has worked in the Christian publishing industry over here and around the world for a long time was talking to me about, in fact, some of the publishing houses that you have mentioned, and how that they have then, of course, started publishing various books. I mean, the Enneagram is a very good illustration of that. That are then totally off the Bible reservation, as I would call it, and having out of Bible reservation experiences. So there's been, and as he said, I think there's been judgment on the Christian publishing business as well because of that.
Well, there is, and for the average Christian, they have this idea. Now think about this, because you may not have thought about this before. They have this idea that Christian publishing houses, their books are theologically vetted before they're printed. In other words, we think it has the biblical housekeeping seal of approval on it. That is absolutely not true. It happens on the scholarly side of things. Right. Because you also will have other scholars critiquing whatever you produce. So they're more careful there. On the popular level side, they just assume the author knows what they're talking about. And so their editors are looking for grammar, punctuation, and will we be sued? Those are kind of the big three things before it gets produced. Lastly, then, once it passes those, will we make money on it? So, and that's a problem. So you have a lot of false, questionable teaching filtering into the church under the pastor's nose. So this is how this works. You have what we might describe in America as the good old boy network. Now you've seen how I dress, so I understand the good old boy network. The good old boy network is, I know Pastor Fred, he's a good old boy. He's using this material that he recommended I use. I can trust Pastor Fred because he's a good old boy. He's a good pastor. And so I start using his material unchecked. And I pass it on to my friend, Pastor Joe, and tell him Pastor Fred told me it's good. I just got it. I'm going to be using it. Now he's using it. So now you have three churches using this material
Hmm.
unvetted,
Right.
right? The people in the church are buying the material. Why? Because the pastor said, this is good material. Pastor Fred told me it's good. I can trust him. And so now your congregation is buying this material and it's now spreading. I call this a kind of spiritual AIDS, AIDS. It is the acquired ignorance of the doctrines of Scripture. And has the same effect as physical AIDS does. It compromises your spiritual immune system, and so it is more easy to embrace heresy.
And they don't even know that it's being compromised, do they?
No.
That's the key thing. They don't know
Right.
that their immune system, standing up for what Scripture's saying, has been so undermined. Where we will return to these subjects, John, because one of the big ones to me is then discussing the whole NAR thing and the fact that also then, and I know that's a huge subject, but also then to me, why is there such a disconnect of people not understanding these kind of conferences, the importance of them, to understand? Please tell me if you think I'm being dramatic, but to actually understand the enemy, understand what they're talking about. I'll give you a case in point. So when I was at the Parliament of World Religions in Chicago with you this year, I with Carl, I think, yeah, we went to listen to Al Gore's daughter speak. I deliberately went and done that. Not everyone's going to have that. And there they were having a discussion about, disinvesting from oil. I'm just going, do me a favor. To give people an idea, the Parliament of World Religions is where NGO Central meets occultic nutbags, meets stop oil meets, it's all going to be a one world religion loving. And I just think, why are we not paying attention to what is going along more? And I don't have to tell you within the UK about the pagan roots of the UK. And yes, as Carl has pointed out to me with various events, there's a resurgence, a massive resurgence of that because people are looking for an answer. Don, before we go, and a huge thank you. It's lovely to join, for you to join me, and I really appreciate that. Could you please? I'll flash up. I'll put up the logo in a minute. But could you tell everyone how they can reach you, how they can get in touch with your ministry, etc.?
Well, we're going to do two things. I'm going to give you a display that you can post for 1 second here, and we'll make this
Brilliant.
quick so they can see all the information that they need on the Enneagram is on this website here. Go ahead and post it. This is enneagramsecret.com, and enneagramsecret.com. I can email you the link as well. You can put in. Okay, but right here there are 10 presentations that were done by scholars on the Enneagram, including Marcia Montenegro, former astrologer, a former New Ager. They can get the book there. There's the first chapter is right here. They can read that for, it's just on there. Click on it and read it.
Brilliant.
Endorsements, everything about the book is there, so you have that. They can go to our website. That's perhaps the easiest place to reach us. Everything else is there, which is midwestoutreach.org. And if you go there, midwestoutreach.org, you'll have our blogs, which we update every Thursday. There are links to all of our social media and our YouTube channel. We do a live webcast every Tuesday at noon Central Time, U.S. And we have, what else? A Crux. It's called The Crux. It's an email that goes out every Thursday morning, which has kind of a link to the blog and also news going on within Christianity.
Mm.
So that's the stuff we do there. So midwestoutreach.org.
Don, thank you. No, I'm just grateful that we could have this conversation, and we will have more, because um, the ignorance is shocking to me.
Well, it all comes from the same thing. You're asking about the NAR. It's the same
Mm,
problem I just described about the other
mm,
stuff. All of us, this might be helpful. I know you have a couple more minutes, and you want to try to keep
mm,
it to 50 minutes, but
mm,
um, most of us learn our worldview by osmosis, if you
mm,
think about it.
mm,
It
mm.
filters into our brains unchecked. We get it from the books we read, the magazines we read, the television we watch, the films we see, the people we hang around with, including in church. And
Yeah.
so we begin believing things without realizing where it came from. And then one day we wake up and we have these really weird ideas, but we're
Mm,
tied to them because
mm,
we think they're true. And if someone challenges them, then we get irritable because it feels like they're saying you're stupid. No, just not. We're just saying this isn't true. Let's talk about it. Let's work it through. And so it makes it difficult, which then impacts how the church operates. Since the church is not good these days, in most cases, of training and equipping the saints to do the work of ministry, it's become specialized, where our job is to just bring somebody in for the professional to reach them. That leaves us defenseless in the real world.
wow. Mm. Well, I get you. I understand that. I think many people, they can't. In many ways, they can't cope with the real world. They want some. They want some subculture where actually they're called to be in the world but not of the world, and that's where they can be an influence for God. But we have created this subculture. But no. Anyway, Don, listen, thank you so much for joining me. And just to shout out to everyone, you can find me on Twitter on the Sutherland Report. And as I'm slowly getting geared up and to be able to use this medium more and more and just get shows and information out there. And you can find me on Facebook easily as well. So, Don, thank you very much indeed for joining me. And I really hope that you will come back, because I want to have, there are a lot of conversations I want to have with you about various church movements.
I would love to. I think it would be great fun.
No, that'd be great. All right. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, take care. God bless. Bye.